water, earth, fire, air. These are the ingredients used to create the perfect animated show, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Today, I'll be discussing the fact that it's a captivating story and amazing visuals are based on our own history. Well, no, duh, many stories are like that. Yeah, but Avatar is special. Its blend of taking from our real world is what makes it familiar and new every time. One common element I've noticed is often related to the cyclical nature of peace, unrest, rebellion, and war. Just so you all know, my citations are below in the description, and this is part of a video essay series for a class, so you should also check them out if you're curious about the opinions of college students and environmentalism that relates to the show. Just a heads up, if you're wondering what kind of video essay this is, I will be discussing history and cultural comparisons that are in the Avatar franchise. So this means that Legend of Korra, Kyoshi books, comics, and video games are all on the table. I suggest checking them out because you will learn a bunch of lore and history that you just don't get from the show alone, like where is Zuko's mother? To begin, we'll be looking at cultural comparisons, starting with the water tribes, which are modeled after native Arctic, Pacific Islander, and East Asian influences. The Southern Water Tribe is more modeled after Inupiat and Yupik cultures, as we see in their clothing and lifestyles. We could also hear it in their names, especially in Noatak, Kurik, Yukon, Tonrak, and Unalak. However, to show a division between the two very similar tribes, Northern Water Tribe has more stylistic choices that lean towards Siberian and Mongolian elements, which is more seen in their clothing and jewelry. With the most diverse population, we see the Earth Kingdom, who is known more for its Chinese elements, seen in the architecture, clothing, and food. We see more Korean elements in the first couple episodes of Book 2 when we watch Zuko and Iroh's story. We see Japanese elements from the Kyoshi warriors, and even Middle Eastern or Indian elements near the middle of Book 2 when we visit Misty Palm's oasis in the desert. Wang Shitong's library looks awfully similar to the Taj Mahal, if you ask me, and the Palace of Ba Sing Se is also taken from the Forbidden City in China. It's even said that the outer wall of Ba Sing Se was modeled after the Great Wall of China for its impenetrable nature. And as we can see, the technology and transportation follows very similar to trolleys, trains, tanks, blimps, and eventually transformers, which is a very interesting reach for Avatar. The culture of the Fire Nation is primarily inspired by East, South, and Southern Asia. From my research, a strong Thai culture was prominent in the clothing choices, with some Japanese elements in certain outfits. Don't forget the Sun Warrior civilization, which is also known for its strong Mesoamerica feel. Iceland, Hawaii, and the Polynesian Islands are the main inspirations for the geography of the Fire Nation. The creators got a chance to tour Iceland for research for the Fire Nation after finishing Book 2, and can be seen in episodes such as Sokka's Master, where the waterfall is modeled after Gullfoss waterfall. Fire Nation also seems to be really advanced with its main properties in progressing its navy. Their tanks are modeled after World War I tanks, and their warships are modeled after modern Chinese warships and LSTs, landing ship tanks. We see this mostly in Avatar: The Last Airbender, where Zuko's ship is modeled after the LSTs, which are smaller than the actual warships themselves. Air nomads are primarily based on Tibetan and some Nepalese culture, the Shaolin monks, and Sri Lankan Buddhism. Other influences are drawn from Hinduism, as we see in The Guru when we learn about the 7 chakras. Even the temples are modeled after Tibetan palace that's embedded into a hill in Yarlung Valley. Also, Aang's teacher and Aang's son, Monk Gyatso and Master Tenzin, are named after the 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso. Lastly, we have Republic City. Though the colors signify their home nation, citizens wearing modern clothes with traditional elements and less layers tend to be more focused on the style by the time that we get to the Legend of Korra. Tech advancements explode, and we see and learn of advancements of cars, airplanes, and larger-than-life warships that utilize not only firebenders, like the ones that we see in Avatar: The Last Airbender, but with water and earth benders for artillery. I believe that the story world of Atla is entrancing because it puts a spin on what's familiar. But if the clothing and environment don't fool you, then what about the animals? Well, the creators stated that they didn't intentionally mean to have hybrid animals, but the creation team competed each other with the wildest possible animals, such as the saber-toothed moose lion, the otter penguin, and the squirrel toad. Now, it's no secret that the visuals are one of the more appealing aspects, but what about the history and lore building? In my research, and probably your own too, I've come to realize that the story of Avatar: The Last Airbender is very similar to our own if you look beyond some of the most common elements. First off, it's important to note that, like many fantasy stories, Avatar has a long history that spans over thousands of years. The Avatar calendar follows two types of styles: the Chinese New Year, which the first day of the year begins near the end of winter, early spring, instead of the middle of it, like our calendar, and a rain era, which counts the days of the Avatar since birth. However, that last one was more common in the olden days, and in terms of if it's used for the modern day, it's more used by historians and for spiritual ceremonies. As for a way to label the years, we're going to use what the Avatar Wiki has offered, which is similar to our common era coding. BC and AD, or BCE and CE, whereas Western calendars have begin our year 0 at the birth of Christ. For Avatar, it would be where the Air Nomad genocide took place, so their coding would be BG and AG, before genocide and after genocide. Now, based off my research, I could say that the following includes these larger kinds of eras. Pre-antiquity. This era would have been where mythologies are born. And in Avatar, this is the time before Rava, when spirits are born and the first humans appear. Think of it as before the ancients. In antiquity, this is the era as the time of Rava, and is first known when harmonic convergence starts, which is the battle of light and dark between Rava and Vatnu. This is also the time that humans build their homes on lion turtles' backs and would be temporarily given an element to bend as protection when they would dive into the spirit wilds to hunt. This is more like our pre-antiquity, or think like early classical era, if you think like ancient Rome and ancient Greece. Post-antiquity, lion turtles decide to no longer protect humans as the first avatar appears, and humans leave the turtle lions' backs and meet with each other. Waterbenders separate into groups to find new homes, and bending becomes what we know it as it gets passed down every generation. Learning how to bend is taught from animals such as airbending from sky bisons and firebending from dragons. And I say this is most like our Great Migration because now the world is settling into new homes and interacting with new environments that later become the Four Nations. However, people can be pretty greedy, and this is where we get into a feudal era. Sun warrior civilization spreads firebending to the Fire Island archipelago, which eventually results into warlords fighting over land. A man manages to defeat the remaining warlords and bring them to justice, uniting the islands into the Fire Nation and becoming the first Fire Lord, the leader of the spiritual Fire Sages. The Fire Lord and the Fire Sages lead a spiritual role, but however, over time, political power accumulates, and the Fire Lord becomes more of a political power, which then results in the Fire Nation as a sovereign, and the office becoming hereditary, beginning the line of Fire Lords. Something similar happens with the Earth Sages, in which they become de facto leaders, and the Earth Kingdom is unified under a city-state authority of Ba Sing Se. The king of Ba Sing Se is then the Earth King, and smaller domains under the Earth Kingdom have hereditary lordships. It is also known that the royal princess fight to become king. This is very similar to our own feudal era in which monarchy government starts. Pre-100 Years' War. At this point, air temples and the water tribes begin to open up communications after moments of isolation, and they begin to prosper. This would be a period of very peaceful time. However, natural disasters cause post-disaster displacements, and Fire Nation citizens are placed into the Earth Kingdom without permission, and it becomes a major source of contention, which we see in a conversation between Avatar Roku and Fire Lord Sozin in the episode The Fire Lord and the Avatar. And after Sozin allows Roku to die, eventually the comet strikes and a world war is caused by the Fire Nation, in which he wipes out the air temples and creates sieges on the Earth Kingdom and water tribes. Post 100 Years War, Aang returned and takes less than a year, give or take maybe 8 months, and it takes some time for the world just to chill. Aang and Zuko and the Earth King try their best for a harmony restoration movement, which at this point Firebenders and Earthbenders have lived together for over 100 years in the Fire Nation colonies and are caught up in the movement between these political powers. Eventually, the Fire Nation colonies begin to prosper and become a new area of land called the United Republic of Nations, which focus more on everyone as an equal despite what bender you are. This story pops up in the comics. This eventually leads to the modern day, in which Aang passes and Korra is born, and the modern day follows Korra's story and the setting she holds, which involves Republic City, a diverse city with its equality problems, evolution of democracy, and progressing technology trends. This can be more seen as our mega cities starting to develop. So now that we've learned a abridged version of Avatar history, what does this mean then for with our real world? How is this a comparison? Well, so I mentioned that what the eras were like. Post-antiquity is similar to our Great Migration, and pre-100 Years War is somewhat similar to our Age of Exploration in the sense of that we're starting to open new lines of communication and we're starting to prosper in wealth. Sure, it's not as damaging as our own world's Age of Exploration, but communities are starting to form and relations between nations are bettering. Trade is becoming more prominent, and also technologies in water vessels are starting to become more prominent as well. Post 100 Years War / modern for Avatar, it's difficult to place it because it's a quicker history than our own. I would say that post 100 Years War and modern is about half the time that our own world is, in which we start to see a scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, later industrialism and capitalism start to flourish. And if you're not 100% convinced by my explanation of the eras, which I don't blame you, I pinpointed certain features of history in Atla and Korra, which represent our own history. So the air temples create an isolationist policy. I saw it similar to the Japanese isolation policy. Southern Water Tribe notes the wealth disparity between North and South. I saw this as similar to the American French Revolutions and the American Civil War, in which, especially where with the Southern Water Tribes, they were under the same power as the Northern Water Tribes, but eventually they separate and the Southern Water Tribe does is get its own autonomy. And this sounds very similar to the American and French Revolutions, in which, if you know American history, America wanted to separate from England because they didn't like the idea of being a larger landmass that's being controlled by a smaller island. There's a lot more that goes into it. French people didn't like that the poor, even though there were more of them, were just being controlled by the rich monarchy, which didn't seem to care. So they overthrew them. Not to that element in which I think the tribes would do that, but then it becomes more similar to the American Civil War, where there's just a disparity in between the North and the South, and there was contention. Fire Nation Earth colonies. 2008 Sichuan earthquake, in which a natural disaster has has brought the government to put them in a different spot for now. But it's been a long period of time, and people still haven't returned to their homes. The Earth Kingdom is unified. I thought of it as Qin's Wars of Unification, in which China becomes unified instead of separate kingdoms. And then the Air Nomad Genocide, especially all the events that surround it, I thought of World War I and pre-World War II, like just before we get into World War II. Not necessarily the prospering, but like the contention that builds up to World War II. Then we get into Korra, in which Kuvira and the Earth Empire sounded very much like World War II Axis leaders, and how they treated how they came to power and how they start to treat their lands. Republic City looks very similar to a combination of megacities in the 1920s and 1930s, leaning more towards Hong Kong in my opinion, but it has the same elements as like New York. And then we also get professional sports in pro bending, which though their uniform looks very much like early football playing uniforms, it's a lot based on boxing, I believe. So, Avatar: The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra. Story building is absolutely amazing. If my report on their history doesn't convince you, especially with the fact that their history is familiar and similar to ours, then I hope you at least get the chance to look through the series if you have not. It is an amazing series. It is one of the best storytelling elements out there, and I personally can't wait to see what they're going to do later. Thanks for listening to me babble, and have a great day.